First things first, the guy who I'm talking about declaring is Labaron Philon. If you follow the channel, if you follow SEC basketball, if you follow Alabama basketball, you know that Labaron Philon declared for the NBA draft earlier this offseason and left open the possibility of return. The way that he worded his announcement, it did not seem like he had left open the possibility of return, but then you started hearing some things coming out of, no, he may be able to return. We'll see. There were some comments coming out from his camp of, oh, he wants to be a top 20 pick, so we'll see what happens. Labaron Philon officially shuts down the I'm not going to return, I'm going to be staying in the NBA draft, and that's something that I think Nate Oates and staff have been prepared for. I will say, when you look at something like this, I'm very proud for Labaron. I'm very happy that he's going to be able to do this. From a building a roster standpoint, the fact that he did leave that ability to return open potentially did hurt us a little bit when you're talking about other guards. I think you had some guards that potentially were not able to speak or did not want to speak to Alabama because they were concerned Labaron Philon was going to return and that their promises that they may have gotten looked at just were not going to be realistic, whether it be from an NIL perspective, from a playing time perspective, from a lead guard perspective. So I do think that his ability of leaving that open to return may have hurt us slightly from a transfer portal perspective. Obviously, you want to leave that open because if Labaron did decide to come back, obviously you know that he fits the system very well for what you're doing. He's also an Alabama kid. So, his ability to come back, I think, is paramount when you're talking about something like that. But I think it doesn't go without saying that there is a possibility that there are some players that did not look at you because they were concerned from a Labaron Philon returning perspective. Two guys that have been linked to Alabama, one of which, publicly was announced that he was going to be visiting Alabama. As I record this on Monday evening, he was actually supposed to be visiting yesterday on Sunday evening. It comes out earlier Sunday that the visit's going to be pushed back. And from what I'm hearing, the visit may be entirely canceled, is the guy Claude. And Claude is a good player. I'm not going to say that Claude's a bad player. I think that Claude would have been a good fit for Alabama. He mimics Mark Sears in the way he looks, much in the way he played the last season at USC. He 18 points a game. Not a good three-point shooter. That's what a lot of people are going to point to, that he's just not a great three-point shooter. But, that's not what we would have been asking him to do. I think that, and we'll talk about this a little later, but Nate Oates knows the amount of shooting that we have currently on this team. When you're talking about a Biz, a Trelly, Bethea, TBB, multiple stretch fives, you really have great shooting on this team. So if you have a creating wing, whether it be Claude or whether it be Jones that we'll talk about here in a second, you really have that ability to be able to not need to have every single guy on the floor be just an elite three-point shooter, right? When we've looked at some of the teams here recently, right, even last season's team, Cliff obviously was not a guy who attempted any threes. Mohamed Diabate was not really a three-point threat. He obviously made a couple throughout the season and ended up having a decent percentage, but for huge percentages of the season was not really a three-point threat. Darian Reed was not really much of a threat when he was on the floor. Jaren Stevenson at the beginning of the season was not a threat. Toward the end, he obviously did come into his own. But, there have been plenty of teams where at a minimum the center position with Chuck and then with Cliff were not three-point threats. But what you're going to have this next season when you're dealing with guys like Aiden Sherrill and Noah Williamson at the 4 or at the 5, and then you have TBB at the 4, you really have guys that can stretch the floor. You have guys that have that ability to make threes at a high clip. You have a guy like Bristow that's, again, able to make threes. And what you're going to have is you're going to have the floor spread much better than you have had in years past. Whether you're talking about a London Jemison, whether you're talking about an Amari Allen, whether you're talking about any of the guys on the team, right? Whether they be freshmen, returners, transfers, everyone can shoot, right? The only guy on the team that I would consider not the best three-point shooter currently, I would assume the worst three-point shooter on the team today might be Davion Hannah, and he's a spacing wing, right? He still has that ability to shoot the ball. His offensive game is not nearly at the level his defensive game is today, but like he's probably your worst 3-point shooter on the team. You're in a position right now where the entire team can shoot the three. And so because of that, it's really going to give you the space and the ability to have a guy that maybe cannot shoot as well in Desmond Claude. As it looks, based on some reports, it sounds like Claude and his camp may have asked an NIL number that was unreasonable. They may have agreed to a visit, and then, once we agreed to the visit and it got posted out there, oh, he's going to be visiting Alabama, that caused him to maybe get some bigger offers from other people. He comes back to us, counters with a larger number, and Alabama says, I think we're okay. That is one report that I've heard. I don't know if that's true. I think it, is in line with some of the things that we have heard. Claude has visited a few places without committing, so this being a bit of an NIL play is a possibility. But that is one guy that's been linked to Alabama. Another guy that, if you followed a lot of circles that has also been linked to Alabama, quite a few people have already put out that they expect Alabama to be the one to sign him, is Keonte Jones. Keonte Jones, formerly of Cal State Northridge, this last season, played a couple of years in the junior college ranks, so has another season left because of that. Is a guy that, by all intents and purposes, does want to come to Alabama, and the Alabama does want him, from what I've heard. He did visit about a week ago, and it was not super public that he visited. There were a couple of Snapchats or Instagrams that were posted that people were able to tell that he was on campus, but it was not one that was just really publicized, whether it be by media or otherwise, that he was on campus. But from what we've determined, he absolutely was on campus. From other, college basketball media sources, the report is that there's something personal going on. I'm not going to delve into a college kid's personal life, so I don't know what's happening. From everything that I've heard, people are expecting it to be able to be resolved and expect him, if it should be able to be resolved, to be in an Alabama uniform this next season. I don't know what that entails, right? So I'm not going to pretend to know what it entails. I just want to let you know that as of today, if there was a name that I would expect to potentially be in an Alabama uniform if all works out well, Desmond Claude is near Keonte Jones is near the top of that list, because I think that his ability of being a playmaking wing, his ability to facilitate, his assist rate's just absolutely incredible. As a defender, he has some of the best stocks in the country from a steals and blocks perspective. I think that obviously playing in a system in Cal State Northridge where they played very fast, obviously different than Alabama, but coming from a system where you play very fast, I think the transition would be solid for him. I think he has an ability to be a decent three-point shooter, but that isn't what we would need him to do. He also attacks the rim really well. He's a playmaking wing. He gives us what we would need, and I think he's an immediate starter at the three if you can get him, right? Like I said, I don't want to say what's happening because I don't know, don't want to guess, but that is what we're hearing, is that there's something going on that's preventing this from happening anytime soon. But that is a name that Alabama has been linked very closely with. There's plenty of people that have put some crystal balls out, but that is a name that I would expect Alabama fans to just be on the lookout for. If you hear that Keonte Jones commits to Alabama, don't be surprised. If he doesn't, then maybe whatever was going on was unable to be solved in the manner in which most people expected. Now we're going to move over to what Nate Oates was said. Nate Oates was questioned by the Next Round guys at the Regents Traditions last week. He mentioned a couple of things that I thought were really important. The first one was that he was saying that he wanted at least one more guy. He thought that he would be okay if he had to go into the season with the guys he has today, but he would be concerned from a depth perspective. Obviously, knowing that injuries and things have happened in the last couple of years, and that is a major concern. So as I would consider, Nate says he wants to add at least one more guy. I would love to see us add two more guys personally, and fill up the roster slots from a 13 perspective. I know that, a lot of people are going to say, oh, just because we have 13 guys, we've been redshirting the last couple. Yes, I understand, but it still gives you the ability, if you have 13 guys, that even if you redshirt one or two, you then still have 11 guys that can play, versus if you have 11 guys and you end up redshirting one or two because they need to be. Now you've got 9 guys, somebody gets hurt, and our ability to play with depth at the speed in which we play becomes a problem. So personally, I would love to see us add at least one more guy. Would love to see us add two, but we will see what happens as it relates to that. Just a heads up, there may not be a ton of things that come out about basketball here in the next couple of weeks, just because there is a dead period that's going to be taking place from May the 21st through June the 1st. So that is something to just keep in mind. I would expect it to ramp up once June the 1st happens, because the deadline for the NBA Combine players to withdraw is May the 28th. So immediately following them withdrawing from that NBA Combine, I would expect Alabama and plenty of others to be reaching out to some of the players that have withdrawn and do have their name in the transfer portal. So that is one place to consider, when you're thinking about filling out the last couple of guys in your roster. Some names have already withdrawn, guys like Boogie Fland and others. But there are other names which people are expecting to go on the market, whether it be R.J. Lewis or Jameer Watkins, or there are plenty of others that, from the expectation of most people kind of watching the transfer portal, watching the combine, there are a couple of names that are kind of expected to hit the market. And when they hit the market, obviously, once that dead period rolls around, there will be people reaching out to those players trying to set up visits. So when June 1st rolls around, I would expect the news to ramp back up. But with the dead period, it might slow down just a little bit over the holiday weekend. The last thing that I want to talk about was the other thing that Nate Oates talked about on the next round kind of interview that he did with the guys. He talked, and I mentioned part of this earlier, he talked about this potentially being one of the best shooting teams that Alabama has ever had. When you look at this team from a three-point shooting perspective, every person on this roster absolutely will have the green light to shoot it from three. Most of them are very accomplished shooter. All the players, that have been in the college ranks are accomplished shooters from the three-point line. Honestly, funny enough, one of the worst three-point shooters statistically from the three-point line is actually Jalil Bethea, but he was, one of the best shooters coming out of high school and was considered just an absolutely elite shooter. You could argue part of the reason behind his shooting woes was the system that he was in and the type of shots he was being forced to take. So I would expect his numbers to go up much in the way that you saw Aiden Holloway's go up in a better system for his skill set. So that is a place where I would expect, and when you're starting at a floor of Jalil Bethea, just a top 10 prospect with an elite three-point shot, and that being your worst statistical three-point shooting guy, you're building from a really, really good spot. Obviously, you have guys like Latrell Wrightsell and Houston Millette that are great three-point shooters. Aiden Holloway shot at 41% this last season. Aiden Sherrill really came into his own after he got kind of into the flow of things. Noah Williamson, an elite three-point shooter. TBB, an elite three-point shooter. All of these guys, I think, really have the ability to stretch the floor. And so I do think that you may see a little bit different composition from Alabama this season, and maybe some of the plays that we run, because I think the floor is going to be spaced even more this season than we may have seen in some years past. Because in some years past, we've had the big that was unable to stretch the floor, whether it be Pringle, whether it be Cliff, whether it be Chuck. We really had big stretches where you would have at minimum one guy that didn't have a green light from three, and in some cases two that didn't have a true green light from three, right? Mohamed Diabate was never considered, toward the end of the season, he obviously became more of a threat, but he really was never considered the guy that was truly, you got to step out on him. So because of that, Alabama, some teams when facing Alabama could pack it in from a defensive perspective. I think the shooting that Alabama is going to have on the floor this season is going to allow us to space out the floor much better than we've ever been able to do under Nate Oates. I think it's going to allow his system to be able to thrive in space, and I would expect it to be one of our best shooting teams that we've had under Nate Oates. The other thing that Nate talked about in that interview, and I thought that it was funny, is that they asked him about the NBA, and he mentioned about how he had been to some NBA training camps, and as a part of that, he redesigned the practice facility that is set to complete at the end of basically this time next season. So for next year's recruiting class, next year's incoming guys, they're going to be playing in the new practice facility with the new players lounge, the new coaches, offices, etc. So he mentioned about how when they were getting ready to start, he kind of ripped up the plans, and because of going to a Celtics camp, he ripped up the plans and decided that he wanted to have his office right next to the shooting facility or the gym, where he could kind of see if anybody was doing voluntary shooting. He could just call guys right off the floor into his office, etc. So it does sound like this is a big pet project of Nate's, so to speak, and Nate is very, very involved in what's being done as it relates to this practice facility. So for anybody that's been concerned, that Nate is looking at other places, or he wants to go somewhere else, I would shelf that, right? He even mentioned that he didn't think that the NBA season and NBA schedule made sense for him with having kids in high school and middle school currently. From what we have heard, I would expect Nate to be at Alabama at a minimum through his kids being out of high school, right? Once his kids graduate high school, then there is the possibility that, the NBA comes calling or someone comes calling, and Nate does, take that opportunity. However, until that takes place, I would not expect Nate Oates to be going anywhere. I think that he's got what he wants here at Alabama, and, they're getting everything set up exactly how he would like it. So that's the last thing I would say when you're relating to Alabama basketball. As I said, I'm sorry this is a little bit shorter episode today. I will be recording, like I said, another episode later on this week. If there is some news that pops up, I know there's plenty of people here on the channel that may be interested in some football news, and I do promise I will have some of that out. Actually, two of the guests that I have lined up for later on in the summer do focus much more on football, so we will be diving some more into the roster, into the quarterback competition, into some of the other depth position competitions that may be going on, expectations for the offense and defense for this upcoming football season. So please stay in touch. If you're interested in something like that, subscribe to the channel, put your notifications on, whether it be on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, anywhere that you can rate, comment, subscribe. I really would appreciate it. It does help out the channel. As always, if you enjoy this content, please let me know. Please let me know if there's anything that you would be interested in having me talk about. I do read all the comments and reply as often as I can. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.